ahead, Mr. Hutchins.
Hello, my name is Randy Hutchins. I thank you for your time and for your attention. In July, I gave the board 2 math problems to work using algebra tiles. Today, I give you more problems to work. Problems with pretty pictures of hearts, diamonds, smiley faces, explosions, crosses, and lightning bolts to solve simple algebra. Why these ridiculous examples to work algebra problems in Texas? It is because we suffer Common Core, reform math, in the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills as a result of the process standards. After my testimony in July, you asked TEA Representative Monica Martinez about the process standards. While what Ms. Martinez said is technically correct, indeed the process standards have been in the code since 1998. Her statement is unfortunately very misleading. Let me explain how the inclusion of the process standards in 2012 resulted with Common Core and the TEKS. In 1998 edition of Chapter 111, Subchapter A, Elementary Math, the term process standards is not used at all. There is a list of underlying processes and mathematical tools listed at the end of each grade level and course for upper grades. The processes and tools are the same for K through 3, then more are added for 4 through 5, and more are added for grades 6 through 8. In 2012 edition, this list of processes and tools is moved to the end of the TEKS for each grade level to the beginning, and now defines them as process standards. The wording was updated to be nearly identical to Common Core. The 2012 revision lists the term process standards 82 times. Let's look at an example from 5th grade. In the introduction to 5th grade math, the following is stated. Statements that include the word including reference content that must be mastered. The process standards then state, select tools including real objects, manipulatives, paper and pencil, technology as appropriate, and techniques including mental math, estimation, and number sense as appropriate to solve problems. Then in every single content standard portion of the TEKS, the following is stated. The student applies mathematical process standards to. This pattern is repeated in every grade level because each content standard calls for the process standards to be used, and the process standards call for methods including objects, manipulatives, etc. All of this content must be mastered and tested. Welcome Common Core. As I have demonstrated many times with examples, including the algebra tiles and ridiculous pictures from today, the instructional materials are starting to teach many methods. This is the pathway the reform math zealots use to corrupt the TEKS. These reform math zealots...
Could you kind of ended up there with your most salient point there at the end?
Yes. These reform math zealots have infiltrated the TEA and organizations the TEA contracts with the TEA looks to for advice. TEA has become a lawless organization. They have pushed Common Core into the TEKS, they violate parental rights, and they are not implementing the requirements of House Bill 743. We need the State Board of Education and other legislators to do what they were elected to do and correct these situations. Review the TEKS, remove Common Core, and this ridiculous content. I thank you for your time and your attention. Any questions?
First of all, thank you for stepping out and speaking up. Thank you for last time, too, because I thought it was a very good presentation. As I told Laurie before you, that I am moving forward to see what we can do to put more teeth into that law. And I have got my senator and my House representative to help. Anything you can do, honestly, in that regard, that is apparently the only way we're going to be able to get a handle on this thing and stop it. Okay?
We're talking to the senators.
Are you?
Yes.
Good. I think if we really work together and organize that, so thank you.
But I hope this kind of clarifies how this process standards corrupted this.
Yes.
Yes, Mrs. Cartman.
So, could I ask staff, maybe Ms. Martinez or Shelley, you know, the board is not allowed to dictate methodology. So could you explain what is the difference between including process standards versus methodology? I mean, there has to be, you know, I know it says including here, but we can't dictate how they do it. So what's the difference?
Well, so that's, I think that's another one of those issues, as Mr. Fire mentioned earlier, that gets a little bit tricky because there are certain processes that you, for example, the writing process, learning how to read, that you would want to have in your standards, but at what point, there's not necessarily going to be a very clear delineation between what is methodology. So what you identify as what students should know and be able to do at the end of a grade level or course, but the way that a teacher provides the instruction to get that student there would be the methodology. And so I know many of you recall that you used to have essential elements. Those were standards for teachers. That was methodology. What you're now focused on is what should a student know and be able to do, and to some extent, that's going to involve certain processes. Unfortunately, I don't think that there's a clear-cut definition of, you know, this is or is not methodology. You have had those conversations. If you think about some of your CTE standards, for example, I know when we were looking at some of the language and some of the recommendations, and in those standards, when you're really talking about students practicing certain skills that lead toward a career, there are processes, and you've talked about, and there were some instances where you took some language out because you felt like that was getting really close to methodology. And so, you know, it's just one of those things that you have to struggle with, and as you vote to adopt the different sets of standards, I think that's something that is always part of your conversation. I think this board has really tried to adopt what are standards, and you've really tried to steer clear of what would really be methodology. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, but clear as mud. It's very
Yeah.
it's confusing. It's not your fault because it's just a confusing thing, and it still is. It's still hard for me to grasp that these process standards have been in the TEKS since they were created, 98, 99, but they were at the bottom, and it seems that moving them to the top is what made such a big difference. And I think also that math teaching and the current research, you know, I look at it and I'm like you, I'm like, what in the heck, you know, this.
Right.
Why aren't they learning it the way we learned it, which makes more sense?
And
So,
the problem comes in when they tie the content standards, which are very good. We all agree that the content
right,
is
you
good.
said that, yeah.
But when you tie it to, you have to solve it using these process standards, and they list, and it is methodology. I just this morning looked in chapter 111, subchapter A, area model, which is a methodology for solving multiplication, is mentioned 9 times. Standard algorithms only mentioned 7 times. Pictorial models, drawing pictures, is listed 23 times. This is methodology. This isn't, you need to know this by this date. This is methodology, and it is in there.
Ms. Perez? Oh, yes, Ms. Harding.
I think Monica actually did a very good job of explaining the difference between methodology and the process skills. If you are in the process skills in English or in social studies, they might say you need to synthesize, learn to synthesize, or do different, maybe reading maps. We just don't tell you which maps that you have to read or which book you have to read to synthesize. We are saying that is a skill that you need to be able to do. But when you start getting to methodology, that's a skill, the methodology, if I tell you which things you have to use to do that, to reach that. Would that be okay, Mom? That's like from the beginning, she's a little bit further advanced than I am on this, but that's the way I would look at it.
Andrea, wake up. Mr. Manning?
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, I just have really struggled with this because I'm kind of a big process guy. And I believe in teaching process, and because there are certain processes that are inherent to education. But I guess I would just tell the speaker is that when the process standard appears to be not talking about process to work a problem versus the process to learn how to work a problem, to me that gets awfully close to methodology. And that's really been my real struggle with this, and then you and I have talked about it. So.
And if you look at the examples, the problems I gave, they're actually testing not can you work the problems, they're testing can you use that process. In other words, on the first page of the handout, it says model by drawing a scale, algebra tiles or pictures. It doesn't ask you to solve the problem. It tells you to draw the pictures or use the algebra tiles. That's ridiculous. You can't use this in the industry. You'd be run out. You'd be fired.
Mr. Mercer.
Thank you for being here today and being very diligent and always coming back. And one of my things in my heart is when I hear about third, fourth, fifth grade kids taking these long exams, taking 2.5, 3.5, 4-hour exams, and we discussed that in the laws last session, and helped us with that too. And to be frank, I'm worried about, I want kids, like in the real world, you would say, I think you're the one that said in the real world, in a previous testimony, what counts is speed and accuracy. The right answer, how fast. If I'm trying to get the test to a reasonable time, but I'm making a kid do these multiple step things where you draw a picture, what have I done? Am I testing, can you add, subtract, apply number sense, or am I testing a process, or can you get the right answer? Do you see my concern? I want the test more reasonable time-wise, but if I'm making them do a process here, instead of can you get the right, you choose the method, give me the right answer. Is that what you're asking for?
Yes. And last time I was here, I told you my older daughter was going to take the math placement test. I went and reviewed that test yesterday and worked every problem because I found errors in the test. UT admitted, yes, there are errors. They corrected them. She did pass. She was moved this week to Algebra 1. But it took me 2.5 hours to work 63 questions. And I'm a degreed mechanical engineer. I know math. It took me 2.5 hours to do that test.
Because the questions were asked not by your knowledge.
Multiple steps, and sometimes you had to work from each answer, so you had 4 choices. But to even get there, you had to solve each of the answers to figure out, does it match the question they're asking? Because you couldn't go from the question to get to the answer.
Have you ever seen Singapore math?
Yes.
Which is a world standard. And when I've seen sample test quizzes in Singapore, they're very, am I wrong, very straightforward. Can you answer the question? And yet we're talking about world-class standards. So I think you're in agreement with me. And one of my concerns about the TEKS be as rigorous as they are, but if we're making kids do a process and not the right answer, then I'm worried about long tests because kids are being forced to draw pictures of things instead of, can you tell me what is 4 times 4? Can you add and subtract?
Right. And how long does it take to draw a picture to solve a problem? And we're putting these time constraints on a time test.
In a
Yes.
time test, I'm telling kids, do a process versus can you get the right answer?
Yes, that is definitely my concern.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Rabb.
Good morning, thank you for being here. Let's start with something we agree on. I agree that the state of Texas should implement and comply with the law in House Bill 743.
Yes, thank you for your questions to the Commissioner yesterday. We are watching. Parents do.
I think, to quote one of our presidential candidates, we are a nation of laws, and I don't think we ought to hold students and parents and teachers accountable to a law that the agency itself is not going to comply with. Here's my struggle. The state board, I don't think, wants to pass standards to say a student shall learn how to read, period. We've got to give them some guidance. I think universally, all 15 of us, there's not a single one of us that wants Common Core in our classrooms or in our students' lesson plans anywhere in the state of Texas. I think there's a unanimous consent on that. I do think that there is unanimous support for phonics. And so every step we take towards, we want them to read, how do we want them to learn how to read? We want them to use phonics. So we've taken one step towards methodology. And so we get into varying scales of gray of how much do we guide the teachers of how to do it. I do think our standards are exceedingly too long. And I think it's a lack of trust of teachers to do their job and get kids where we want them to be. I think the state ought to be in the what business, not the how business. What should a kid know by the end of 3rd grade, or 8th grade, or Algebra 1? Professionals, you go figure out how to do it, because not every kid learns the same. What I think we're dealing with these process standards, in my day, it was learning your multiplication tables. That was a process. It was a tool. But the processes have changed. And granted, I barely understood math when I was there. I certainly don't understand it now. But the way it's being taught differently, and it is confusing for me as a parent. But I think the importance is still to get to the right answer. And I think, Chris, I'd like to ask you a question since we're talking about math specifically. Does the state's end-of-course test require them to do a certain process, or is it just a multiple choice answer of which is the correct answer?
It's a multiple choice answer.
So teaching the kids the process is to make sure they get the correct answer regardless of the question, because we can figure out a way to get the right answer one time, but it may not work for the next problem, so they've got to learn processes and the rules to get to the right answer, but the state doesn't ask them how they got there, we just ask them, can you get the right
I will
answer?
make one point though. Some of these multiple choices are pictures, and it says which of these represents the question. So they're testing the knowledge of algebra tiles or drawing the pictures.
Okay.
So it's not just getting an answer. The
Right.
multiple choice sometimes has these same screwy methods.
And that does raise a question. Are we asking a question about the process, or are we asking a question
Yeah.
about the answer?
And that's why I included the math examples
Yeah.
here that show, can you model this using algebra tiles? Or they don't ask you to solve it, but can you draw the model? And
I really appreciate you coming, and I do, I think there are varying scales of gray between an absolute, here's what we want them to know with no guidance, and then the more guidance we give, we start getting into trouble telling teachers how to do their job. And it varies by grade level, it varies by subject, but know that this board, and we've talked about it as recently as Wednesday, we want to get into and start streamlining these TEKS to get back to what are the core concepts, what do we want them to know, and then let them have the liberty to do their job.
I would encourage you to seek out people with math knowledge, not just
Curriculum directors.
like TASA or TASB or any of those.
Oh, we had engineers, teachers, we had
I spoke to
parents.
Dr. Milgram 2 days ago, and he agreed with me the process standards are the problem. And when I testified previously that it's Phil Darrow's process standards that collapsed California's education, they fell to 49th in the country back in the 90s. It's the same stuff. It is the exact same process standards that California used in the 90s.
Appreciate you being here today.
Members, any other questions? If not, well, I know we have some flights that folks need to take, and I want to make sure we get to some of these agenda items. Yes, Mr. Bradley?
Real quickly, I appreciate your comments, and it just, a little song goes off in my head. We have been here before.
Yes, we have.
It's deja vu, and it has been over the decades. My mother pulled me out of public elementary schools because they came out with the new math. And when she could no longer work the math problem, she said, I've got to make a change.
Yeah, read that brief history that Dr. Hines passed out. It explains that whole
And in the
math for us.
90s, we had a textbook here, it's estimation, that just baffles me. Math is just an absolute. There is no estimation. I don't want my airline pilot estimating where the runway is. I don't want my surgeon trying to estimate how much anesthesia I might take. I don't want my engineer working on a bridge to estimate what the load capacity might be. There are absolutes. But we had a textbook, and Robert Byrd in the Senate, it was bipartisan. He called it Rainforest Algebra. And it had jalapeno recipes, and it had discussions of the Vietnam War, and Hillary Clinton was, you remember it all. The Greenpeace's phone number. But it didn't have an algebra equation until after page 100. And that's what we were putting into our students. So it comes full cycle, and here we are. We had a battle trying to put into the TEKS, a philosophical battle with the education establishment, is to require kids memorize the multiplication tables 12 through 12. It was a battle, and it barely passed. And why resistance? Well, memorization is hard work, we were told.
Oh, jeez.
And it's not necessary. Well, I'm sorry, it's work. Well, they have calculators. Well, somebody's got to program the calculator one day when all of us old people die off.
Mr. Bradley, do you have a question?
So why are we having this problem? Is it the education colleges?
Yeah.
Where are we getting into trouble if it is indeed a methodology problem?
Yes, I do believe that a lot
Read
of
my
your
handout.
education, like the UT Dana Center, Common Core started in Texas. It really did. That is a fact.
We know that.
The UT Dana Center is highly responsible for some of that. So I think that it's a lot of the education, what are they called, ESCs, where the teachers go to get their training. A lot of those people have been pushing this reform education.
For decades.
Yes.
Thank you for your efforts. We'll continue to
Okay,
fight.
any other questions of our testifier?
We will
Thank you
too.
very much. Okay, members, I want to go ahead and do the approval of the consent